My name is Aldous Crane, and I have lived on the parcel of land adjacent to the Wetherton homestead for 31 years. I am telling this story because Wetherton himself is not a man who tells stories, and because what happened on the morning of the 4th of January deserves to be told correctly. The winter of that year was the kind that makes you doubt the season's intention to end. The first heavy snow came before midwinter and stayed, and by the new year the drifts along the ridge road were shoulder high, and the creek at the base of the eastern pasture was frozen solid. My own livestock were in the barn, and I was spending most of the day on barn chores when the weather was at its worst. Wetherton, who farms the quarter-mile north of my fence line, was in the same state, a man working hard to keep his animals and himself alive through a winter that had overstayed its welcome. Wetherton is the sort of man who does not call attention to himself. He is perhaps 50 or near it, wide in the shoulder from 2 decades of field work, with the particular quiet of someone who has spent a great deal of time alone and has made his peace with it. He has no family on the land, no wife for the last 6 years, no children, a brother in the eastern townships he visits once a year. He runs cattle and a modest kitchen garden and keeps a clean house and is, in my experience, reliable and decent in the way that some men simply are without needing to mention it. I first knew something had happened when I went to the ridge road on the morning of the 4th. I had woken before first light because one of my ewes was due, and after attending to her, I took the ridge road south toward the crossroads to see whether the supply wagon had made it through. The road was passable, but barely. The drifts had eased overnight and the sky was clear and very cold. I was perhaps 100 yards from Wetherton's front gate when I stopped. There were orcs at his gate, not one, not two. I counted as they came into view in the early gray light. 20, then 40, then more coming up the ridge road from the south, in a line that extended back further than I could see in the half-dark. They were large, orc warriors, by their bearing and their equipment, travel-worn from a long road with frost on their cloaks and their breath in, great clouds in the cold air. They wore the colors of a Highland clan. The deep green and brown banding I recognized from the market at the crossroads, where the Highland orc families traded in summer. They were carrying, among other things, a slaughtered deer slung between two of them, 2 large sacks of grain, and what appeared to be a rolled bolt of heavy winter wool. They were not threatening. They were not arrayed for conflict. They were standing in a loose, respectful group at Wetherton's front gate in the early morning cold, and they were waiting. I walked forward slowly and stopped at the fence line. The nearest warrior, a tall woman with gray braiding in her hair and the bearing of someone, Senior saw me and nodded, which I took as permission to come closer. I said, "What is this?" She said, "We are here to pay a debt." Her voice was formal and careful, the kind of formal that people use when they have rehearsed something important. I did not know what to say to that, so I stood by the fence. Wetherton came out of his front door at first light. He was in his work jacket and boots and carrying a mug of something hot, which is how he starts every morning, and I believe he had looked out his window and seen the gathering at his gate and decided to do the sensible thing, which was to put the kettle on before he went out to deal with it. He opened the gate and looked at the group assembled there. By this point I counted near to 200, the road behind them still showing more arrivals, and he said, "Morning." The senior woman stepped forward. She said something in the Highland orc tongue that I did not understand, and then she said, in the common speech, "We are the Grethwood clan. 3 nights ago you gave shelter and food to a woman of our clan who was caught in the storm on the ridge road." She paused. She was the clan mother's sister's daughter. She was carrying word home from the eastern market. Another pause. "Without your fire and your food, she would not have survived the night." Wetherton said, "She was welcome to it." The senior woman said, "We know." She gestured, and the 2 warriors carrying the slaughtered deer brought it through the gate and set it down carefully on the cleared ground near his front step. The grain sacks followed, the wool, and then I could see Wetherton's expression change slightly. A third group of warriors brought through a young calf on a lead rope, dark brown and healthy, which they tied to his fence post with care. Wetherton looked at all of this. He looked at the 200 orc warriors at his gate in the early cold. He looked back at his mug. He said, "I only gave her soup." The senior woman said, "We know what you gave her." She said it in a way that ended the accounting and also settled something. I felt it standing at the fence 30 feet away. She meant the soup, yes, but she also meant the fire he had built up higher and the dry blanket, and the fact that he had not looked at this unknown woman in his doorway in a blizzard and made a calculation. He had simply let her in, Wetherton said. Will you come in for breakfast, all of you? He looked at the size of the gathering. I can do a large pot. The senior woman looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, an unhurried, real smile, and said, We have brought our own provisions, but we will share a fire if you are willing. He was willing. I went back to my own farm to check the ewe, and when I came back along the ridge road 2 hours later, there were cook fires going in Wetherton's yard, and the Grethwood clan's forward party were roasting the deer and boiling grain, and the smell of it was coming over the fence in the cold, clear air. I could see Wetherton moving among them, easy as a man at his own kitchen table. The Grethwood woman who had been in the storm, her name was Veth, and she was perhaps 25, broad-shouldered and quiet, with a healing cut on her cheekbone from the blowing ice, came to the fence where I was standing and said, Your neighbor is a good man. I said, He is, she said. He did not ask who I was before he let me in. I thought about that. I knew Wetherton well enough to know that was true, that it would not have occurred to him to ask first and decide second. Some men are made that way. It is not a complicated thing, I think, but it is uncommon enough that it means something when you find it. I said, He never does. She nodded and went back to the fire. The Grethwood clan stayed through the morning and into the afternoon. When they left, heading north along the ridge road in the same long line they had arrived in, Wetherton's yard had been split with firewood. His fence rail on the south side had been repaired. It had been listing since November, and I had meant to mention it. And the calf was secured in his barn with fresh hay. The bolt of winter wool was on his kitchen table. He came to the fence when the last of the line had passed and stood there for a moment, looking at the empty road. I said, What did you give her? He said, Soup and a dry place to sleep. There was a storm. She knocked on the door. He went back inside. I have told this story 6 or 8 times since, and it always comes out the same, because there is nothing in it to embellish. A woman knocked on a door in a blizzard, and the man who lived there let her in. That is the whole of it. What came back? The deer, the grain, the wool, the calf, the 200 people on the road in the cold with their breath in clouds. That was not a surprise to Wetherton, I think. I think it would have surprised him more if nothing had come back at all. He is still farming the 1/4 mile north of my fence line. The calf is a fine young heifer now. I see the Grethwood trading party come through the crossroads market in summer, and there is always a stop at his gate on the way. He always has the kettle on.